And when anybody asks why we do as gardeners what we do, I think this basket here tells the story beautifully. Welcome back, folks. Today we are going to putz around the garden a little bit. I'm going to show you a handful of things I got going on, take you through a couple projects I'm working on, just random stuff here and there. I thought it'd be fun for you to see a few tasks and a few garden highlights and lowlights. And yeah, so we're going to go through, what are we going to look at today? I planted some figs up in the newly established food forest slash orchard. They are very young plants that I propagated from cuttings late summer. I had them inside, they leafed out. They've started to root out outside now in their pots. They're not ready to go into the ground by a traditional standard, but I've done it anyway because it's kind of what I do sometimes. And I'll show you what that looks like and what the kind of my planting method around that. I've got a couple of blackberry suckers that I popped in water in the house on the windowsill to let them root out a little bit. We're gonna put those in 4-inch square pots. We're gonna pull another sucker from the garden that I found and get him in water to root out. I've got habaneros and marigold seedlings that I dense started. They've popped up enough to where we're gonna put those in some potting mix in their own little cells, let them root out before they go into the garden. I'm going to show you my new tomato trellis I put up yesterday because yesterday I called the raspberries dead. They've been in the ground for 3 years now. They've produced nothing. I've tracked the canes. They've leafed out. They've never flowered or fruited, so they are done. They never came back this year. It's late April now, April 24th. They should have the existing canes that were last year's new growth should have either leafed out this year, or I should have seen a new sucker out of the ground by now. From the ground, I've seen nothing. So yesterday I called it, and that area became an area for cherry tomatoes that are indeterminate, so I have a trellis for them. And then we'll also talk about a little bit of a low light thing that's going on in the garden that's been kind of on my nerves lately. You know what, let's start with that because we're gonna get the negative out of the way, and then we're gonna have fun with all the positives that can go on in the garden. So this bed here is a bed of brazen greens. It was a mixed variety pack of seeds I've had for a while, the last couple of years. I like it. It's got red Russian kale. It's got a couple types of mustard. It's got tatsoi and bok choy. But this spring has been horrible for me with bolting brassicas early. This is bok choy. I've already lost it. Now, bok choy I lose in the spring pretty often. It's not that big of a surprise. But this year I've started to lose mustards as well to bolting already, and this is only late April. Last year my mustards held until late May, early June. I don't know if it's because the temperature swings have been so aggressive this year, but it's been really disappointing. And the other thing that I just keep losing left and right to bolting are my overwintered onions. And they went in the ground in October, probably mid-October of last year. Seed started them probably early September. And yeah, they're all flowering at this point. I'm not gonna get, I'd be surprised if I get a single bulb out of this bed. There were 80, 100 onions in here. It's not gonna happen. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Again, we had a brutally cold winter and it turned into a pretty warm spring that's gone up and down. Twice now we've gone from low 30 nights to mid 80 days within 60 to 80 hours. And I think this is just, it's telling the onion that you've had a full year of growth. It's time to flower, even though they haven't had 6 months of life yet. So I think my days of overwintering onions are probably behind me, and I will just do an early January seed start for a early March transplant for a late June harvest. I'm going to try that going forward, but I'm not going to commit bed space to something that's going to do this. Now, it's not all's not lost because I can still just as easily, and I have been, harvest these for greens. They are green onions ostensibly, and when I pull them out of the ground, I'll have a very immature bulb that I can probably chop up and throw into pretty much any savory dish. But these would have been good solid storage onions of really good size, and I'm gonna get nothing near that. So that's kind of a bummer. So now we're going to talk transplanting figs way too early. But here's my logic behind it. These plants were sitting in 1 gallons the last couple of months outside after I brought them out of the house when the worst of the freezes were behind us. They had leaves. Their root systems are very slow to follow, but I know where I wanted to put them up into the orchard, but I got impatient. I didn't want to wait until the fall, and I wanted them to, here's my logic behind that. They're not rooted out in their containers yet. As opposed to forcing them to root out in their container and then transplant them, since they are not root bound yet, since their roots are just kind of going down the sides of the container from the base of the area, from the root node that it's coming out, I wanted to let that happen naturally into the actual soil, as opposed to breaking it apart later, disturbing it. It's a thought process that I think is going to be absolutely fine, but a little unconventional. Most people are going to transplant a fully rooted out pot into their orchard, and I'm kind of pulling the trigger early on this. But let me show you an example of a plant in a pot that has not made it up there yet, but it'll give you an idea of what you're going to see when you're up there. So this little guy here has a good little leaf system, and I'm pretty sure if I took him out of the pot right now, he has a handful of roots that are probably showing on the outside, which means there might be a little more root inside, but definitely not, really bound up in there tightly with a really aggressive root system. Now, what I've been doing up in the garden, up in the orchard food forest area, is I've been digging out a not a really deep hole, almost more of a basin that's maybe that deep. And it's about probably 1.5 feet wide, about yay deep. I take all the native grass out of that area. I take all of the native soil and I mix it with homemade compost in a wheelbarrow. I don't really backfill it at that point. I do put a little bit of that material down, like sort of at the base of the basin. I take the plant out of the pot, and the material is holding together, and I rest it in the middle of that basin. And then I backfill all the material around him. Now at that point, the native soil line is probably right here. So his actual whole crown system is still only about halfway into the native soil, but I backfill all of that material around him, pack it in nice and tight, not compacted, but really force it in there to where it's holding the plant in place so that this structure doesn't fall apart. And then I mulch with wood chip really heavily around that as well, so that when I water, this is not going to dissolve and break apart, exposing those roots. It's holding together in there. And that's kind of my planting method. He's going to be, it's high up, and the reason it's going to be high is because we are on a really sticky red clay here that by visual inspection has next to no, if any, organic matter in there. And it's very different from what I've built in this garden, which I've spent the last 4 years top dressing that exact kind of soil with just all kinds of different organic matter, to where if I take a trowel, I can dig 4 inches here before I hit that sticky clay. Whereas up where the food forest is, all you're going to see if you actually dug a hole would be grass, line right here, roots, all sticky clay. So I'm trying to make sure that these are not planted in an area that's not draining, because I have dug a hole, I have watered the hole, and I've watched it take 2 days to drain out. That's not ideal for any plant, especially something that like a fruit tree that doesn't want wet feet. So coming up to the orchard, you can see I've been keeping it mowed. These are the trees that I put in. I popped a little bit of water-thin latex paint on them to avoid too much sun scalding on the newly transplanted trees. Didn't want to disturb them. And you can see that I am mulching this entire area. So I'm taking wood chips, wheelbarrow, and moving it on up, probably about anywhere between 4 and 6 inches deep. I'm not cardboarding the surface because I don't want to go through the hassle of having to obtain 3,000 square feet worth of cardboard and then have to de-tape and de-label it and all that stuff. I really just want to get this area here rich in organic matter in the native soil, because I do want to plant a lot in here over the coming years. And to do so in this red clay is just, I don't think it's putting the plants up in for the greatest chance for success. But let's take a look. So here's a fig. And again, this is basically the another version of what I have in that pot that you saw. And this is how he's getting planted. He's probably, you know, like the top of the soil line of the top of the potting mix line in the pot is probably a couple inches higher than the native soil. So the bottom 4 inches are in the native soil, which is all backfilled with the soil plus the compost. And I think this is going to do just fine. I had a couple of them that I put in about a week ago, maybe a couple of days after the trees went in, and they're still leafing out. Nobody's experiencing transplant shock because nobody's roots have been disturbed yet. Now, whether or not those roots decide they want to find a home in this is another story. I think they're going to be absolutely fine, but this is me showing you right now on April 24th what the status of this is. So as we do orchard tours over the coming year and years, we'll see if these figs that we put in by traditional standards too early hold up. And if they do, it's a good lesson to be learned that, hey, you know what? Even in the spring, you have a plant that's healthy but not quite ready to go. It doesn't mean you can't do it. Or maybe we're going to find out that flat out shouldn't have done this. But I've got other plants in reserve, and it's always a good learning experience to try new things. Now, before we head into the potting shed to pot up the blackberries, I wanted to show you, these 5 plants here are all blackberry suckers that I pulled out of the ground and threw into this potting mix probably a couple of weeks ago, maybe a little longer. And they're still green and still alive. I'm assuming they're throwing roots in there as well. But what I wanted to try to do to see if my success with this has been fine. I actually had 6. I did lose 1. 5 of 6 isn't bad if these things continue to go strong. But I wanted to see, I pulled out 2 about a week ago, and neither one came out flat out without a root to be seen, and another one came out with just a tiny little spindle of a root. And I wanted to see if I threw them in water in the kitchen, a little better condition for them temperature-wise, would they root out in there before I transplant them into pots? And lo and behold, they both did. And that's what we're going to go put into pots right now. And then we're going to come back out, grab one more sucker, and get him into water. Because I wouldn't mind seeing if if I can get even closer to 100% by starting them in water before putting them into a potting mix so that they can start taking up nutrients a little quicker. So this is the little jar I had these guys in, and as you can see, they both rooted out pretty well. This one in particular had no roots at all. It was just this long stem. These roots are all new. This fella here had a really kind of limp, sad root out of the bottom, but none of these other ones. So I think he's in a position now to get into the potting mix as well and really take off. Now when I do this, I'm going to water them in, and I'm going to keep them in this shed by a western facing window so that they don't get too much light and heat for the better part of the day, and that way they won't be hopefully too stressed out as time goes by for the first week or so. Now this one here is another sucker that I popped out and put straight in a potting mix, and he's doing just fine. So I know that method works because if he actually is continuing to go, I had 5 of 6 outside, that's 6 for 7 success. Either way I think is going to work, but I was curious to know if this would even increase my success rate more. So I've got some 4-inch squares here, and really the name of the game is just to make sure that I'm not disturbing that root system too much. So I just kind of sprinkle around the plant gently to where he holds into place. So I'm trying to make sure he's in the center, and then really carefully just sort of firm this material around. Now this is mostly, it's almost entirely homemade compost, and it's either homemade compost that I made or it's homemade compost that my chickens made, because my chicken run is, at the bottom of my chicken run is 2-foot hardware cloth that's a 1/2-inch square. And I loaded my chicken run with wood chip 3 years ago when I first got my hens. And the run slopes west to east and kind of north to south. So all the material, as it rains and they work through it, seems to move in that general direction. And in doing so, all of it, as it breaks down, sifts through that hardware cloth on the eastern edge. And so that's a lot of what this material is broken down wood chip and chicken manure. And it's been sitting there now for 3 years. And I go over there every once in a while when I just want to kind of get a pre-sieved material for myself. And I just pick it up. And I might run it through another hardware cloth thing that I have. I've got 2 of these. This is a 1/2 inch. I've also got a 1/4 inch, depending on how fine I want to make the material. And in doing that, I can get a material that's nice and well sifted without big chunks of anything in there. And the benefit of that is the more sifted a material, the less time it has for the less time it needs for more decomposition. So, for example, if we look at this and call that wood chip that's still breaking down, that's going to break down a heck of a lot faster than chunks like this. So as this roots out over time, those are going to break down more and more, which is going to make any nutrition in there available quicker for the plant, especially once he gets transplanted out and he's in contact with native soil. So I'm good with them. One other thing, while we're here, we can look at. This is an elderberry. Now, this was a random occurrence. I was in the garden. I was working around the base of the plant, and I bumped a branch, and it snapped. And I took the branch inside, and I broke it down into 3 cuttings. And I don't know if they were leafed out at the time, but I don't think they were. And I've got leaf growth on all 3 now. And that kind of came out of nowhere. So that little half-baked experiment where I was just kind of thinking on the fly might have yielded me 3 new elderberry plants. That's pretty exciting. It's one of the things that I love about propagation in general. I love seed starting. It's really fun to take a seed, watch it grow. But for some reason, to me, there's something even cooler about the hardwood and softwood propagation. I don't know what it is. I think I enjoy that aspect just a little bit more than seed starting. And I do love seed starting, but I don't know. It's fun to take a piece of wood, stick it, and watch a leaf grow out, and then see roots come out. And maybe I also like the fact that I'm growing something that I know is going to be multi-year because it's perennial in nature in producing more and more food, where the annuals are one and done. And now we are going to head out to the blackberry patch, and we're going to find that little sucker. We're going to put him in some water, see if we can get the same method going. And there it is. I think that is a blackberry sucker that must be coming off of my Primark Freedom, because that's the closest plant to this one. When we get into the middle of the blackberry patch that I've got, it's harder to say when a sucker's coming out from which root system it is, because they're all very intermingled. So I know if I take a cutting from my blackberry, or if I take one of the branches, stick it in the ground, I know what plant that is, but when the suckers are coming out, that's when it's more of a crapshoot. We're going to see what we've got in his system. Let's see what he's got coming out. It's probably going to be a real thin. Look at all that mycelium. This has never been composted, this area. This is all decomposed wood chip over the last 4 years. So I've got a heck of a growing medium for my plants out here, but it was a long time coming. I can feel the root right here running laterally. I'm not sure, maybe a good shot. Okay, yeah, he popped right off, and he's got roots already, and a big chunk of wood that he grew right through. Ah, beautiful. I think I might have actually got that broken off to free him up from that without straining him too badly, or did I break him? Nope, he's busted. You know what? No biggie. We're still going to take that. We're going to pop it in water, and we're going to let him root out even further. And this is a good experiment because, again, with that kind of damage to his roots, because we lost this, which had some feeder roots on it, will he be able to come back from that? I think the answer is going to be yes. But time will tell, and this is all part of the experiment. And if he comes back, that's a pretty easy way to get another, what's going to be in 8 months' time, less than 8 months' time, a well-rooted out blackberry plant. And probably, over the season, I'll get him potted up into a 1 gallon eventually. And yeah, not a whole lot of effort to get a whole lot of amazing food. Now, while I've got you out here, not, 6 feet away from that particular sucker that we pulled up, I've got this one. Now, this I haven't pulled yet because this is a strong plant. I take it back. This piece right here, I can tell you already busted off. Now, you know what? What the hell? We're going to throw him in the pot too, and we're going to see if he roots out. I say the pot, he's going in the water. Because that just snapped off of him. I'm willing to bet I kicked him at one point because I didn't see this, but this is a really thick primocane, and I'm so tossed up about what I want to do with that. He's not really in a good place from a, he's kind of in a pathway. But I hate to kind of disturb that because that next year could be a really solid fruiting cane. But I think I am going to have to pull him out eventually within the next couple of weeks and give him, I might go straight into a good solid 1 gallon pot with him, depending on what his root system is. But boy, that's a beautiful plant. I'm keeping him caged right now because I'm too prone to walking in this area and not seeing him and stepping on him, and that's just too valuable a plant to sacrifice so carelessly. So folks, we are now going to pot up our marigolds and habaneros. And I like doing this method for a couple of reasons. This is a little mushroom container from Aldi. I sliced the top off of it, filled it with potting mix, put these in. There's not even drain holes in there. Not a best practice, but they don't stay in here for very long, and I don't overwater them. So they don't have a significant, they've never in my history had a significant risk of molding. And I can reuse this cut plastic for my microgreens that I do inside. Because inside I don't want these things draining out. And since they don't get overwatered, I don't have any issue with that. The cool thing about a method like this is you can maximize your space that if you have a small space available for producing seedlings, which require light and maybe some bottom heat, or you want to trap moisture in an environment, it can be hard to do a large volume of seeds in something like this without much space available. And I'll show you what that means in my context. That little section over there is a shop light. It's plywood, it's a handful of heat mats, and it's an old fitted sheet draped over the top. That is the best propagation space I have in cool weather to start my seedlings. And the reason why is because in my house, I have no south-facing windows. And I don't really even have a physical space in the house, because we don't live in a big house, that would accommodate a setup like this very well. So I start my stuff outside, and this is how I get it done. Everything you see in the garden that's a plant that's not a perennial is started from seed by me pretty much right from this, especially if it's cold weather. So I really can't fit much in this area. But what I can do is start things like this. I can take small containers, I can dense plant them, and I can produce a large number of seedlings in a small spot in the worst of the weather, and then I can get them into something like this quickly, and they can root out in this when the weather gets a little better. So that's kind of my strategy for this. It also gives me an opportunity, if I have an old seed pack, to test them by dense planting them and not sacrifice much potting mix, especially if I'm using something that is a high quality potting mix that I don't want to reuse for the same purpose. So for example, so usually I use homemade sifted compost for all my seed starting, but I did get a bag of ProMix VX because if my compost is not producing the way it has in the past. Like this year has been a little bit touch and go. Everything that I've started my homemade potting mix, my homemade compost, hasn't done as well this year in the seedling state. Now I transplant everything out there, and once it's in the garden, things go a lot better. But in the seedling state versus prior years, my compost, for whatever reason, isn't acting the same way. So I want a backup plan of a higher quality mix, and that's what the Pro Mix does for me. But I want to use that more sparingly because it is expensive. So I don't have to sacrifice much of that if I do an approach like this. And then I can just dump this right back into my homemade potting mix and not worry about having to retain the quality portions of that material. So when you do something like this, all you got to do is set up your next tray, dibble all of your holes, and transplant. And this is not a difficult process, and a lot of different seedling types will handle this absolutely beautifully. So for example, tomatoes are extremely tough seedlings. Peppers, a little less tough, but they do okay. Even lettuce can transplant very well. Brassicas do extremely well. Flowers, specifically the marigolds, I do those. I've done them many times like this. Less so with some of the bigger seeds because it's just not a larger seed isn't quite worth doing that with in my mind. Certain seeds that I probably wouldn't do that with would be things like beets and radishes, not because they wouldn't work, but because I think those are better served to start in trays like this in small cell packs. One seed for beets, two seeds for radish typically. Let them root out and send them straight out in the garden in that fashion, as opposed to breaking them apart because they multi-sow absolutely fine. You can have 2 to 4 radishes in a clump, 2 to 4 beets in a clump, and the only thing that's going to sort of get sacrificed is if the more you have, the smaller the final product for each one. But per square foot, you may actually get more food that way. Now to take these out, it's really nothing more of a process than, I'm going to try to be careful with these, but we'll see what the root system looks like coming out. So yeah, I can see some roots going there. And this is relatively damp because I had these things watered in. And the breaking down process isn't that complicated. You just sort of start massaging, pulling them out. And as they come out, this is what you get. A seedling with a root. And then you just, be relatively careful. You don't want to, destroy your plant in the process, but you don't have to treat them overly gingerly. And you got a plant in there. And these are going to do absolutely fine. I know they're going to do okay because I just did another one of these marigolds in a much lower quality potting mix, my homemade stuff, and every single one I transplanted has survived. And they're going to root out in those other containers that I have, and they'll transplant out into the garden beautifully. So I'm going to get this done, and I will show you the final result when it is completed. So the marigolds are done. We got 50 of them. Not unhappy with that because I've got another tray not too dissimilar to this one that also had about 50, and I started them the exact same way. In those little cut mushroom containers, I sewed a bunch of them in there, watered them in, let them ride for about 4 or 5 days, moved them out, and they're doing fine. Every one I transplanted is still holding up, so I'm really pleased with that, and I'm going to be just as pleased with this. And we'll have about 100 marigolds to put around the house and in the garden, just with a few minutes of effort. So yeah, I'm going to do the habaneros a little later today because, again, like I said, I don't do drainage holes in these, so sometimes they do get a little more waterlogged than I would like. I do test the medium on a regular basis to make sure that I'm not saturated. If it does get saturated, I'll tip it over and dump the water out. But I can tell that one's a little wet. So I'm going to let him dry out a bit. It's going to be easier to break the potting mix apart, and I'll come back today at a later time and do that. And I'm not worried about the habaneros being this small in late April. Here in the Piedmont of North Carolina, We're in zone 8A. We have a long growing season. Those I don't even have a spot in the garden right now for either the marigolds or the habaneros, but I'll have spots coming open with the when the strawberries come out and when the garlic comes out, which is going to be strawberries will come out in a couple of months. Garlic's going to come out in about 6 weeks or less than 6 weeks. So a lot of capacity opening up will be just in time for these plants to go out. And these, they'll go out sooner than that. I'll find spots to just plug marigolds around the garden because you can always use more flowers. And now I'm going to take you out, show you the trellis that I built for my tomatoes and give you a little backstory as to how that came about. Now, my typical effort that I put forth for tomatoes usually revolves around paste tomatoes. I grow a determinate variety of San Marzano, and I do that because we like to load our freezer up with blended up tomatoes that we use for sauces throughout the year. And I like the determinate variety because it sets flowers and fruits in a very short period of time, so we can basically know that within a 3-week period, we're going to fill up the entire freezer with tomatoes. Now, that doesn't leave much for fresh eating throughout the season, but that's not something we really do a whole lot of. I don't do sandwiches in the house, so we don't do slicing tomatoes. Now, with cherry tomatoes, I used to grow on a regular basis a variety called Mexico Midget in the garden. And a couple of years ago, somehow in this Rubbermaid container that we have outside of the house, it came with the house. I'll show you a picture here. Somehow, seeds from the Mexico Midget wound up in that container. So for the last couple of years, self-seeding tomatoes have actually come out of there, and that's where we've got our fresh tomatoes from. But it's an unruly mess. I don't manage them. The yields are obviously going to be low if you're not taking care of them. And that's been the result, but it's been enough for us. But this year, I wanted to try something different. And I say this year, yesterday I decided to try something different. And the reason why was because yesterday, like I said, the raspberries came out because they were dead, and it left me an open spot in the garden. And in that Rubbermaid container, we had 25, 30 seedlings popping up of that tomato variety. So I pulled, I think it was about 4 days ago, I pulled about 12 of them out and put them into cell packs. I let them root out a little bit in there without even knowing what I was going to do with them. At that point, I didn't know the raspberries were coming out, but I just wanted to take a chance on just saving some of those plants. And now I found out exactly what I'm going to do with those plants. I say I found out. Yesterday I decided what I'm going to do with those plants. So let me show you the end result of that. Not the end result, but close to. And I'll explain what I'm doing with this now. Now, in my gardening career, which spans, I guess, probably about 10 plus years as an adult, I've grown a very respectable number of tomatoes and different varieties and different types. I've done slicers, I've done salad tomatoes, i.e., cherry, grape tomatoes. I've done the paste tomatoes. Like I said before, that's the primary thing we do here on the property. But what I've never done is actually maintained a really clean tomato plant. They've always wound up unruly. It's been a long time since I've used tomato cages, but I have used those. I've tried staking them. I've tried the Florida weave before to no real success. And honestly, all of my failures on maintaining clean tomatoes have been a byproduct of either I didn't set it up from the beginning in a good way, or I gave up. That simple. This year, I'm committing myself to learning this method. Now, this is a drop-down string method, and if you've seen a trellis like this before out in the garden, I think the most popular video that I've seen on it, and credit where credit's due, Josh Satin, he's actually in North Carolina too. I don't think he produces anymore for YouTube, but it was a video called A Trellis to Make You Jealous, and this is a riff on that. Only because I didn't do any financial investment into this one, because this is all from material I already had. But what's going to happen is when these tomatoes grow up a little bit, I'm going to clip them at the bottom. I say clip them. Let me get you a little closer so you can see what I'm talking about. So the design of this is I've got a T-post on either side, and I think these qualify as 7-foot T-posts. You pound them in the ground, you get about 6 feet out of them. I've got what I think is probably, this is Schedule 40 gray PVC. Again, I have a barn full of that stuff that came with the property. I think it's probably 8 feet long. I think it's a 2-inch conduit. I drilled some holes through these. I tied string, wrapped it a few times around, and I dropped it all the way down to the ground and attached these tomato clips to the bottom of each one. When these plants grow up a bit, I'll attach these. As they grow up, I'll keep attaching more and more of these clips to the tomato, and I'll clean the plant as it goes up. Now, if I decide not to do that, I might do a bit of a wrap around the plant instead, just to keep it trained upright. Removing the foliage and the spent fruit sets on the way up so that you wind up with a really nice clean stem on the way down, and all of your foliage is above your lowest fruit set. This is a method I've seen used many times in greenhouses. Like I said, Josh Satin did a beautiful job outdoors with that. The only difference between his and mine for the most part is he used, I think, metal conduit, and on top of his T-posts, he capped them with connectors. Whereas you can see that I have old electric fence wiring and some string, and I just tied it up with a cross wrap. And I think that's going to hold up. The only question I have is if these plants get really heavy, how is this going to hold? And the answer, it might be okay, because these are not going to be, the Mexico Midget is a very, very, very small cherry tomato. Probably the biggest one might be about the size of my tip of my pinky. So there's not going to be a lot of fruit weight weighing these down. And if I do a good job of keeping the plant clean, then yeah, it shouldn't be a whole lot of heft on the plant. If it does get really heavy, I can always reinforce, I think, this by maybe pushing some, if I can get my hands on like a piece of 8-foot rebar, just shove that on the way through, and that might hold it up a little better. I hope it doesn't come to that, because I don't think I have any rebar on hand. But I think I'm going to be okay with the way it is. But yeah, this is what I've got going on for tomatoes. This is one of my goals now. And again, I just kind of set this goal for myself yesterday, was to learn how to do this clean growing method. Because I'd like to do this going forward. It's a nice space saver. It lowers plant risk disease, and it gives you a heck of an opportunity around the base of the plant to plant more. So I just started a ton of basil seedlings. I've got those marigolds you just saw me pot up. There's no reason, as those plants get cleaned up around the base, that those marigolds or basil can't go around the base. And just, again, maximizing the roots you get in the ground is always a good thing. So yeah, this is one of my goals this year. So as we do garden tours coming up in the next week, you'll see this one there as well. I was about to say farewell, but I don't think I could do that in good conscience if I don't first show you this beautiful, beautiful row of blackberry flowers. I mean, this is just unbelievable. I mean, just take it in. And to give you an idea, this first plant here is Primark Freedom. They call this a primocane fruiting blackberry, but I find that the second year fruit in the spring is so much better than the first year fruit in the fall. And there's so much more of it. Yeah, you get a few berries in the fall, but ultimately this is so far ahead of the rest of the plants. And this is just loaded down with fruit. I mean, I'm going to be getting these while I'm getting strawberries early on, and well before I'm going to get the rest of those blackberries. So if you're in the thornless blackberry game and you've done some of the classic varieties like Natchez or Ouachita or Navajo, I would highly, highly recommend you get a Primark Freedom and enjoy it, if for nothing else than the fact that it's going to throw a springtime berry that's well before the rest of them. And the berries are huge and delicious. And honestly, I think most of the suckers that I've been getting from the ground have been from this one. So its roots are really generous with new plants. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little random excursion around the garden and what kind of horticultural activities we've got going on today. I've got a lot of stuff coming up in the pipeline that I'm going to post. One thing I'm going to do on a monthly basis, this idea came to me earlier this month, is I have been weighing all of my harvests. I've wanted to do this in the past, but I never put the effort forth. But being that I've actually started this channel up, I thought it'd be a fun little additional video I could put out there, and to again give you an idea of what a garden of this size can do as far as food production goes. If you're interested in that, join along for this. I think that's going to be a fun one. It's going to be everything that I'm harvesting this year. Now I'm eating from this garden from storage right now. So I've got my sweet potatoes, I've got a ton of frozen stuff still that we're working through, but everything, the rules for me for this little, and I'll reiterate those in the video early next month when we have the, when I post that one. The rules are pretty simple. Harvested this year, and it has to make it inside to hit the scale. So for example, if I grow a 2-pound kale plant and I get nothing off of that because I just leave it in the garden, or if I walk it over to my chickens because I have way too much, that doesn't count. If I'm harvesting strawberries, which I'm going to do later today, and I find one that has a little bit of damage, it's not going to store well, or I'm not going to bring it inside, I'm just going to eat it there, that's not going to make it either. Got to go inside, it's got to hit the scale. If that happens, it hits a spreadsheet. Spreadsheet's got a pivot table. We're going to see every month how we're pulling from this garden. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And it's going to give me an opportunity to see what I'm growing too much of, what I'm not growing enough of. And that way I can continue to dial in my bed layout going forward to say, I don't need this much of this, I need more of this. So, like I said, if that interests you, like, subscribe, join the channel. Hit some, throw some chats in there. Let's get some conversation going around gardening, especially in the springtime when things are really looking exciting. I love this time of year, especially after the winter we just had. So yeah, thanks for watching today. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.